Stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
A new mobilization of 300,000 Russian troops. Does it mean Putin is conceding that his offensive has not been working? Or is this a dark turn in the war with consequences for the West? We'll be exploring this, the Prime Minister's potential response, what's going on in New York at the UN General Assembly, and what on earth's happening with the energy package for the United Kingdom too. All that to come after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. President Vladimir Putin has ordered Russia's first military mobilization since World War II. In a televised address, Putin issued a nuclear threat to the West, warning that his country would use all means at its disposal to protect its territory. Russia's defence minister says 300,000 reservists will be called up for the partial mobilization. It comes as Moscow-controlled regions in eastern and southern Ukraine plan to hold referendums on becoming part of Russia, which world leaders say will not be recognised by the West.
In its aggressive anti-Russian policy, the West has crossed every line. We hear constant threats against our country and our people. Some irresponsible politicians in the West speak about delivering Ukraine long-range weaponry, missile systems that would allow Kyiv to strike Crimea and other Russian regions. I think it is necessary to support the proposal of the Ministry of Defence and the General Staff to conduct a partial military mobilization in Russia.
The Prime Minister will hold her first bilateral meeting with the US President today, following her speech to the United Nations in New York. Liz Truss and Joe Biden will discuss their countries' economic relationship and how to preserve the Northern Ireland Protocol. Biden says the UK should work to ensure there is no threat to the Good Friday Agreement. Meanwhile, Liz Truss says she does not expect trade talks with the US to start in the short to medium term. The government has announced it will cap energy bills for businesses from October the 1st, a move which will cut the expected wholesale price in half. Wholesale prices are expected to be capped at £211 per megawatt hour for electricity and £75 per megawatt hour for gas. It will also apply to schools, hospitals, charities and other non-domestic consumers. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg also says he will lift the moratorium on fracking, extracting every ounce of oil and gas from the North Sea. The government is being urged to reinstate the eviction ban during the cost of living crisis. The Kerslake Commission on Homelessness and Rough Sleeping says not doing so could cause a catastrophic crisis for the homeless. It's calling for a pause in benefit deductions and for benefits to be increased immediately, not next April, as planned. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Good morning, it's 9:36 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, politics continues to ramp up this morning. It feels like political time itself has sped up. Today, Liz Truss will address the United Nations General Assembly, where she will tell world leaders that she will lead a new Britain for a new era. Her speech is expected to call on the democracies of the world to harness the power of cooperation that the world has seen since Putin's invasion of Ukraine and use that cooperation to constrain authoritarianism. This, of course, comes as this morning Vladimir Putin announces a new mobilization of hundreds of thousands of troops to fight in Ukraine in an address to the Russian people this morning. Well, briefly, elsewhere, the Labour MP for West Lancashire, Rosie Cooper, has announced her intention to step down from Parliament and take a job as chair of her local NHS trust. Cooper had faced neo-Nazi death threats. There'll now be a by-election in her safe Labour seat. And Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg has set out the details of a major energy support package for businesses. Shops, restaurants, pubs, schools and even hospitals could see their bills cut by as much as 45%. But first today to that seismic news we heard just an hour or so ago, what Vladimir Putin is calling a partial mobilization of armed forces. 300,000 soldiers with combat experience will now be deployed in Ukraine. This comes as the Ukrainian army has, of course, made significant inroads in a series of successful counter-offences. Could that advance of the Ukrainians now stutter? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Tobias Ellwood, the chair of the House of Commons Defence Committee. And Tobias, is this what we were expecting? There had been so much speculation about how Russia would respond. 300,000 troops.
Yes, it's
what does
been
it
an
mean?
incredible few days in Ukraine to see the fantastic efforts of the Ukrainian forces with their counterattack, pushing back the Russians 30 miles towards the border. Putin was going to respond. So this televised address that we've just seen is significant, firstly, in its timing. It's designed to clash with what's going on in New York. You just mentioned Liz Truss addressing the United Nations General Assembly. So this is Putin trying to grab global attention, steal the limelight, to disrupt that UN gathering and underline Russia's claim to be a superpower with influence that the world needs to recognize and acknowledge. It's obvious from the response to Ukraine's formidable counterattack east of Kharkiv that Putin is going to have to respond. He's spoken with President Xi only a few days ago. I'm sure he went through his intentions, and operationally now, we're going to see 300,000 troops from Russia enter the theatre of operations. That is significant. And then, of course, you have those referenda taking place in the Donbass area, in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, for example. This will mean that Russia, Putin, will be able to claim that this is Russian territory, of course, with huge implications for Ukraine and indeed the West if we're seen to participate in any attacks there. So this is all moving up a very dangerous gear indeed, and we need to recognize and work together collectively in what our response will be.
Well, let's first tackle those referendums that we're hearing about. We're not expecting these to be particularly legitimate referendums in any sense of the words, I suppose. We've seen referendums in this country, in Scotland, under the terms organised by Westminster, or across the United Kingdom under the terms of the Lisbon Treaty. All of these referendums that we've seen in this country have been legitimate, free and fair. I suppose referenda that are organised by the Kremlin or their proxies can't be assumed to be in the same vein.
No, I mean, you're right to spell out the differences between the two. But this will be sold to the Russian people, and they won't quibble with it. I mean, many of them may question in some way or another, but essentially they're going to be saying, hang on a minute, if these people in Ukraine want to be part of Russia, we need to then defend them. And that is the power that Putin has over his media messaging, which he's cultivated over the last couple of decades. And that's the prism that we need to understand this. All this talk potentially of Putin being thrown aside or overtaken, thrown out, by the Russian elites in the Kremlin, we don't appreciate just the grasp of power that Putin has actually managed to accumulate and has in stock, if you like. Therefore, what he's doing is an acknowledgement, as you said in introduction, that things have not gone well in Ukraine. But I'm afraid we've turned a very, very dangerous corner indeed. Putin isn't going to go away anytime soon, and could easily use more intense weapon systems, potentially a tactical nuclear weapon as well. He cannot afford to lose.
It's remarkable, however, that this is a partial mobilization. Putin very clear to use that qualifier this morning, not the millions of reserve troops that Russia has access to, but just 300,000. Can we read into that he's potentially worried about public opinion in Russia, that he doesn't want to see normal families have their sons sent off to die, that could imperil his own position?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think he needs to take his nation with him, if you like, in this sense. So he is ratcheting this up. It was called a special operation. It wasn't even seen as a war or as a conflict, but a special operation. So clearly things have ratcheted up there now. But I stress the fact that Putin is now somewhat humiliated on the international stage, and indeed with China as well. But for China, it's a win-win situation, whatever happens in Ukraine, because they need oil and gas, and Russia is happy to provide that. And they have a shared hatred for the West, a disdain for the way America has controlled the international community, the international standards and rules across the world since the Second World War. And they want to exploit it. They want to take advantage of the international rules-based order, and can do better if Russia is actually affecting and starting to irritate things in the Eastern Europe. It's sucking in a lot of energy, a lot of resources, a lot of time for West and particularly Europe, and focusing on what's going on in Ukraine.
Well, no doubt Liz Truss's team will be waking up early in New York, potentially redrafting that speech she's giving to the UN General Assembly this afternoon. We'll keep our ears to the ground on that. But for now, Tobias Ellwood, Chair of the Defence Select Committee, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Let's cross now to David Maddox, the political editor of The Express Online, not just for reaction on this, but of the challenges facing this government. So many different announcements, not just on energy, but health and indeed the economy too. How's the government juggling all of this?
It's in a remarkable position, actually. I don't think many prime ministers have come into such a large pile of, in the in tray as Liz Truss has. I mean, of course, she's also had to deal with the death of a monarch and the accession of another one in between, which has put things on hold. But, she's got to somehow keep this international coalition together on Ukraine, which I think is going to be more problematic than it first seems, especially as the energy issues bite in Europe over the winter. Then she's got to, she's making big announcements today on energy bills for businesses. We've got a mini budget coming on Friday. In between, we've got plans to finally start tackling the NHS backlog coming tomorrow, which of course all dates back to the pandemic and lockdown. It's, she's in a nightmare scenario. She's having to act very quickly, and as we speak, she's getting ready to have an argument with the leader of the free world over Brexit, and it's it doesn't stop for Liz Truss.
Yes, let's zoom in to that formal bilateral meeting in New York between Biden and Truss later today. There was a tweet that Biden sent out earlier this week, criticising what he termed trickle-down economics, the sort of Reaganite, or what the left describes as the Reaganite way to run an economy. A lot of people in the UK have been wondering, was this aimed at Truss? I can't suppose that it really was.
No, I think that would be particularly Machiavellian, but it does emphasise the difference in approach to the two. I mean, Biden's party is increasingly being held in the grip of socialists, really. The Democrats have moved remarkably to the left. It's something that we haven't properly tracked in this country, because Democrats were always a very centrist, if not centre-right party. before. And Biden is very much playing to that, playing to the kind of powerful union voices which are emerging in his own party. But of course, Liz Truss has the opposite view, and she does have that kind of Reaganite view of economics, that low tax, high growth is the way forward, and it actually creates wealth and makes a better world for us all. So I see very little kind of terms of agreement between the two, actually.
It's interesting. Perhaps Liz Truss is behaving more like a Bill Clinton, but the way that the Democrats have moved since the 90s is considerable. Turning then to this statement that perhaps will define the Truss premiership more than anything else, which will be made by Kwasi Kwarteng, her Chancellor, on Friday. We're hearing so many different leaks and snippets and bits and bobs that might be going into this. Is this the government getting out the unpopular measures early in the term so that potentially it could turn to more popular measures later on? Is this management of a media cycle?
I think management of a media cycle may actually be being too kind to them. I think they're just struggling to control the leaks in Downing Street. I mean, it was a problem during the Boris era as well. And, it's good news for us in the media that it's leaking. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, one of the leaks is actually about stamp duty and bringing that down, which I think will be quite a popular measure. Actually, that's not an unpopular measure. We're about to actually see the housing market potentially crash and freeze because of interest rates going up and because people can't afford mortgages. So if they slash stamp duty, that would be very good news on that front. And I'm not sure they've got time to wait for good news. I mean, the very longest, they've got an election in 2 years' time. And, she's just got to sit out her stall quickly and go for it, because I don't think she's got much time really to win over the British public at all.
Yes, it does look like they're just reaching for almost any lever that could tick up growth and pulling for it, whether it's allowing higher salaries in the city or trying to make the housing market less gummed up or reversing the national insurance rise, getting rid of the green levies on energy bills. It seems like almost everything is being pulled at to try and get up to this target that we keep hearing about of 2.5% growth. Just finally in this conversation, is that what the Liz Truss premiership will live or die on?
Yes, I think in the end, growth is actually going to be the motto. It was rather like for Blair, it was education, 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 if you remember, just before he became Prime Minister. And, for Truss, it's definitely growth. She wants to reverse this kind of lengthy period of British history where we haven't seen much growth at all. We've seen really quite a lot of stagnation. And she believes in the kind of IEA, the Institute of Economics model, if you like, that you cut taxes and you go for it. She apparently is a fan of the idea of Singapore on sea, which was termed as an insult about Brexit. But, it works for them. And interestingly enough, actually Singapore, very low tax, has the best education system in the world. So, it does show you that low tax can actually provide good quality services as well.
Some interesting lessons to learn there. Of course, Singapore acrimoniously split from a trading partner and had to do some pretty major reforms, but became a success model after that. Well, David Maddox, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really fascinating conversation there. The editor of The Express Online, political editor of The Express Online. Now, this morning, a major energy support package for businesses, shops, restaurants, pubs and schools could see those organisations' bills cut by as much as 45%. This is applying a price cap that hitherto has only applied to households, to businesses and charities as well. And Liz Truss is to lift the ban on fracking this week in an attempt to boost the UK's energy security. The Prime Minister believes that extending the ban on extracting, ending the ban on extracting British natural shale gas will help ease the UK's energy crisis. Environmentalist groups, however, believe we should be keeping domestic energy source, this one, in the ground. Well, joining me now is GB News business and economics editor Liam Halligan. Liam, first of all, on this business announcement, came out 9 a.m. this morning from Jacob Rees-Mogg. Is it all what we expected? This was, after all, unveiled initially by Liz Truss, but got rather clouded over.
Indeed, Liz Truss, in her first pretty much set piece in the House of Commons, interrupted tragically as news of Her Majesty's deterioration in health became clear. The fact that this is happening today, as an announcement rather than in Parliament, the government has to get this energy support package out for business quickly because there is so much concern and angst that tens of thousands, even millions of businesses could go bankrupt this autumn and winter because of high energy prices. I'm thinking in particular, Tom, the small and medium-sized enterprises who can't buy in forward markets, who can't hedge their energy strategy. You have no bargaining power, just like any household with suppliers. And Jacob Rees-Mogg announced the price cap. It's a cap. All these caps work. They cap the unit of energy that you use. So if you use more energy, you still pay a lot more money. It's not a cap on your total bill. It's a cap on the unit of energy.
And that's important because that preserves the price mechanism.
That's right.
Trying to get people to use less. And therefore...
a lot of businesses will become more efficient with their energy use this winter. Environmentalists who say this scheme gives no incentive to reduce energy use, they're talking nonsense because you cap the unit cost, not the total bill. And just to give the unit cost cap, it's £211 per megawatt hour for electricity and £75 per megawatt hour for gas. That's between sort of 2/5 and a half below where most people expect energy prices to be this winter. So a major support package for business. It could cost a lot of money. How much it costs depends on where those wholesale prices are, which, of course, in turn depends on geostrategic issues, not least the war in Ukraine. But this business support package, unlike the household one, which will be detailed on Friday by Kwasi Kwarteng, it only lasts 6 months, Tom. After 6 months, it will be on a case-by-case basis, and that will be highly controversial.
Really, really interesting. Probably tying in there towards how fast this war in Ukraine wraps up, amongst other things. But also, domestic supply is very, very important here. And we're going to be hearing some more about this week, particularly the controversial move that Liz Truss campaigned on to lift this ban on extracting British natural shale gas, on fracking.
Now, I've been following the fracking debate in this country very, very closely, as I know you have too. And during that announcement that Liz Truss made just before Her Majesty's unfortunate funeral and so on, she mentioned she was going to lift the moratorium on fracking that came in. It was imposed by Boris Johnson just before he went for an election, just before he went to increase his majority. He thought it would appeal to younger people and environmentalists to ban fracking. That ban is now being lifted. Liz Truss said in the Commons a couple of weeks ago, she thinks by lifting the ban on fracking within 6 months, that means wells that have already been drilled, they're ready to go mostly, particularly in the northwest, near Blackpool, drilled by a firm called Quadrilla, would be bringing gas, domestic shale gas, on stream within 6 months. A lot of people poo-pooed that idea. They said that's completely ridiculous. So I asked Francis Egan, who happens to be the CEO of Quadrilla, whether or not this 6-month time frame was reasonable, doable, and this is what he said.
Quadrilla has 2 existing wells that we've already drilled into the shale rock in Lancashire, just outside of Blackpool. And in fact, we had partially fracked and tested gas back to the surface from those wells. So we know the gas is already there. So we would have to mobilise equipment back.
So that's Francis Egan. He's confirming that 6 months is doable. He also says, in his view, environmentalists disagree. There's a bright future for the UK if we fully embrace fracking.
It's just a start, of course. This is not, intended to be a sticking plaster solution for the immediate energy price rises. Shale gas, as we all know, has the potential to supply gas for decades. So I think this is a very important part of an ongoing supply strategy, and I think the government is finally realising that domestic gas supply is a very important thing to have, and we can't be wholly or even primarily reliant on imported gas.
Well, Francis Egan there. Thank you so much to Liam Halligan for bringing us those interviews and this really fascinating time in energy policy in the UK. That's it for the briefing this morning. Thank you for joining me. Up next, it's To the Point with Bev Turner and Mercy Muroki. But first, here's the weather.
Good morning, I'm Helen Roberts with your latest weather forecast, and today it's looking fairly similar to yesterday. Quite a lot of cloud around, but it will be dry for the majority of us, and there will be some occasional bright or even sunny spells. Now, there is a change coming for many of us later in the week thanks to this weather front currently affecting the far northwest of Scotland, but for the rest of us, high pressure is in charge, keeping things fairly quiet and settled for the time being. So like I said, today is a repeat performance of yesterday, really. A little bit of early morning mist and fog should burn away fairly readily. Variable amounts of cloud as we head through the day, perhaps becoming a little bit more extensive through the course of this afternoon, perhaps even thick enough in a few spots to produce the odd drizzly shower, but that will be the exception rather than the rule. It will be dry for the majority of us. But I did mention this weather front affecting the far northwest of Scotland. That will become increasingly cloudy, bringing further outbreaks of rain, which will become more persistent and at times heavier through the latter part of the day today and overnight and into Thursday. So you can see this weather front becoming increasingly present across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland into the start of Thursday. Still elsewhere, though, remaining fairly quiet, similar to the last few days, with variable amounts of cloud, but dry for most. However, that weather front continues to make slow but steady progress southeastwards during the course of Thursday. So outbreaks of rain moving into northern England, western parts of Wales, clearing behind. There will be a few showers here where it will turn cooler and fresher. And to the southeast of this weather front, remaining fairly cloudy, but with some brightness at times and generally dry. So that weather front continues to move southeastwards into Friday, so affecting the Midlands and the southeast, bringing outbreaks of rain, clearing at the weekend.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people